Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the County Planning Committee meeting being held today on the 1st of April. I'm Councillor Gillian Campbell. I'm chairing today's meeting. Some housekeeping measures before we start the meeting. Firstly, we're broadcast live through our YouTube channel. So I'd ask people to switch off or make silent their mobile phones and other devices. Microphones to be switched off at all times until invited to speak. And when invited to speak, please switch the microphone on and introduce yourself. There are several officers today present at the meeting, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves.
Kirsty Charlton, Committee Services.
Laura Ackerman, Legal Officer.
Stephen Reid, Planning Manager.
Steve France, Senior Planning Officer, Strategic Team.
Laura Eden, Senior Planning Officer.
Steve Pilkington, Strategic Development Manager.
Phil Harrison, Highway Development Manager.
Nicholas Bryan, Acting Head of Transport and Infrastructure.
Mark Anzo, Health and Environmental Protection Manager.
Patrick Chisholm, Environmental Health Officer.
Thanks. I think that's everyone. We're now ready to start the meeting and we'll move on to the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
Councillors Mary Lynn Franklin, Kenny Hope and Scott Woodhouse.
And do we have any substitute members?
Councillor Blatchford for Councillor Wood, Councillor Mary Lynn Franklin and Councillor Pickard for Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you. And are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Freeman.
Yeah, thank you. The first item, which is the Integra application, I'm a member of the City of Durham Parish Council. They have made comments on this application. I'm not a member of their planning committee and have had no input into anything that they've said. I'm also a member of the City of Durham Trust who have objected to this application. I'm not one of the trustees that makes the objection letter, so I've had no input into anything that the City of Durham Trust have responded to the council about.
Thank you. And Councillor Pickard?
Yeah, so I'm a councillor for this ward, Sacriston and Whitton Gilbert. Just regarding the Persimmon Homes Phase 3, I've made no public statements regarding the development, and I'm coming into this meeting with an open mind.
That's fine, thank you both. Now we are at the minutes held on the 4th of March. Does everybody agree those minutes? Thank you. Minutes agreed. Now we're ready to move on to the main business. The first item on the agenda, item 5A, will be introduced by the officer.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. First application is at Integra 61. It's phase 2 of the development west of Amazon, UK, at Bolburn, near junction 61 of the A1M. The proposal is outline planning permission for the erection of commercial buildings and ancillary in B2 and B8 use classes, ancillary office space, and part of a new road is a new road linking the A688 to the A177 with associated infrastructure, access, landscaping and other works. All the matters on the application are reserved for later consideration if this outline consent is accepted. Site location and showing the two components of the site is set out on the plan there in front of you, and you can see, as per the report, there's the triangular element at the bottom of the site, 76 hectares of land. That's where the commercial development is proposed. And then you can see as a spur running north the proposed route of the BDR, the Bolburn Development Route. You can see the development is to the west of Bolburn Village, and beneath that the existing Integra 61 development, which has Amazon, commercial development, residential development, nursing homes and takeaways and the like. And below that again, you can see Tersdale Industrial Estate. East of that is the blue line, the A1M, the motorway, and you can see the motorway roundabout, which the development proposes to rely heavily on. West of the development site, you can see the site is open countryside, part designated as Greenbelt, part as area of high landscape value. And in the left-hand side of the screen there, you can see some of the designated assets that the report refers to, including Croxdale Hall, which has registered parkland around it, as well as a range of listed buildings. Parkland is some distance from the development site itself. You can see the village of Het on the southwest corner of that plan there. That's a hilltop village, linear in form, with a wide buffer of a conservation area around it. You can see the site from the east part of the village. In the distance, there is again separation from the village and the conservation area from the site. The extended area of high landscape value is effectively a secondary buffer for that. There are, given the size of the site, a range of heritage assets and designations affected, and those are all set out in your report. It's a little higher scale to look at those elements in their own right. On the left-hand side is the commercial part of the development, and you can see curving diagonally across the screen and forming the west part of a lot of the site is the East Coast Main Line that we saw on the site visit this morning, which comes up to the edge of the site at the bottom of it. To the north and west is open countryside, as I've said. Immediately to the north of the site, it buffers the green belt and the areas of high landscape value to the northwest. You can see then as well two spurs projecting from that, where the site is proposed access through by underpasses through the railway embankment there onto existing stubs that have been already constructed in expectation of this development for in Integra Phase 1. You can maybe just see at the top of the site there is the nearest large volume residential development as parts of the phases of Integra 61 itself. Whereas in the right-hand image you can see the BDR, the proposed bypass around the back of Bowburn. Going from the top, you'll see it splays out at the top where emerging from the A177 there's a consideration given there for putting a roundabout junction and visibility splays in there. It curves round to assist on the line of this, which is slightly different from the designated line in the county plan to allow for the speed limit and the traffic to go safely around the edge of the village. But it separates the end of the road from the Grange Estate, which you can see the residential development at the top of the screen there, which is the topmost bit of Bowburn. Beneath that are Bowburn North and South industrial estates. We stopped the bus in Bowburn North this morning, where you could see where one of the original intentions of the BDR was to connect to those industrial estates and provide an access for traffic to go out of those industrial areas without having to go through the residential areas of the village. That has always been a long-standing intention of this. The scheme doesn't deliver that specifically, but it sets up the opportunity for it. So you can see as the BDR heads south, it goes past the Grange Estate, fairly close to 12 properties on the western boundary of that, and between those and the safeguarded railway line, or proposed railway line. There's 2 industrial estates there, an area of woodland at the bottom of the screen there on the right-hand side, which is specifically mentioned in the landscape officer's comments, where there will be some tree loss, which is one of the harms identified of the scheme. And then at the bottom, you can see one of the large industrial units. Now, we saw on the long-distance views when we visited Tersdale House this morning that there's very different views of how those industrial units look in distant views, and how they're coloured, from the unfortunate light grey of the Amazon building to the more subdued colours of the other units. And that is relevant to the following images. In terms of the images for the BDR, the first image is where we stood this morning, looking along the bund, which is currently behind those properties. Keep those in mind for the sectional image I'll show you later on in this presentation. But effectively, that bund would be removed, and there's space for a landscaping strip of at least 10 metres, in addition to the average 9 metres of the gardens, the back gardens, and then a space for the railway line between it. Have to stress again at this point that this is an outline application, and there is the potential for this to change. So effectively, the image of the section we'll show could be a worst-case scenario, and there's further works that can be done to mitigate the effect on residents. Top right shows the end of the bund, and effectively looking across the field where the road will curve back around to the A177. Bottom left is the existing stub that's been left at the end of Integra 61 to serve the BDR. And you can see it's fully specced up and ready for extension. The bottom right-hand image is obviously the aerial view to show the entirety of the grey line is obviously the railway line, the ballast on the disused route, with the industrial estates in the middle there, and the countryside, which is the site beyond it. In terms of the phase 2, the commercial elements of the site, top left we have the back of the farm we visited this morning, the listed building next to the other residential dwelling immediately next to the site, Tillersdean Cottage. And you can see from that how that is the back of the listed building with the more functional elements of it. What we saw this morning was the front elevation with the living room windows, and it was very much designed to be looking south and away from the development. Development will be very large structures immediately behind that, with a little bit of a consideration for garden for this and a landscape buffer, but there will be a significant change to that listed building. In the distant view behind the farm in that image are some of the green sheds, again, which blend fairly well into the landscape, given their size and shape. Top right is from the public bridleway, looking across the farm group and across the development site towards Amazon, which you can clearly see on the horizon. And that effectively looks down from the mid part of the site across its entirety. The bottom left image is shown from the bottom of the site, and the little bottom point of the triangle, where we're getting down towards Tersdale Beck and the East Coast Main Line. And you can see from that image how the site undulates. This isn't flat, it moves with the landscape. And the parameters plans which set the floor plans and the base layers for levels on how this will fit into the landscape does attempt to reflect the landform as far as possible to reduce its impact. Bottom right is the view from the top of the site, looking all the way down it. And again, we do have some of the green sheds on the left-hand side of the image in the skyline, and the Amazon shed on the right. So you can see that there are devices to help large structures assimilate into the landscape. You can also see that this is very much farmland at the moment, although farmland that has been safeguarded in the plan for this type of use. Top left image is interesting. This is Boburn Beck, taken from the railway embankment. As Boburn Beck cuts across to Tersdale Beck and the river, this is the part of the site which is proposed to remain the same. It's going to be a dark area for wildlife. It's going to have the majority of the ecology links on it. And this is proposed to respect this area, and the footpath which runs alongside that beck will remain as well. Top right again shows the undulation in the site, looking from the Tersdale Beck back up towards Amazon, so you can see it's definitely not flat. Bottom left image is the same location, looking along towards Tersdale Industrial Estate. So it's critical to note that whilst this is going to be a significant intrusion into the landscape, it's not introducing a new feature into it, and that was one of the principal points of the landscape officer, in that this is something that's building on an existing feature, and it gets some benefit from that. Bottom right was is the footpath, which we discussed on site this morning, which effectively is the diversion for the one that's going to be lost. It was where we parked the bus, and this is where it runs alongside the beck there and joins up with where footpath 2, which is proposed lost as part of that development, is proposed to join up. Again, splitting the site into two, on the left-hand side shows a potential indicative layout of how large buildings on the site could be accommodated. In the parameters plans and the conditions in front of you, there are maximum heights, so worst case scenario, potentially for the size of buildings there, but that's an element that would be assessed or in reflection of anything that's submitted through the reserved matters procedure. The image with the next to it of the development route at a larger scale, and it's available on the find, does show the wildlife routes that go under the proposed road and how it copes with that aspect of the development. And again, the curve off across the field, so it's splayed out to meet with the A177 just north of the village. The image on the right-hand side, I hope you can see it reasonably clearly, is the indicative section that's been shown. And again, this is probably a worst-case scenario of how this would look. In the middle of the cross-sections, the bottom two cross-sections, is the bund we stood on this morning, dotted in there. I have to say, both the environmental health and the highways consultations that came back said, you know, this is shown in a form that can be significantly improved with further excavation there. You can see on the left-hand side of those images how the railway line is at a significantly lower level again. So in terms of lowering the level of the road and necessarily the acoustic fence or the acoustic barriers that are put in, this does show a worst-case scenario. But that is a worst-case scenario that has been found acceptable by the environmental health officers on reconsideration and additional information that's been provided during the course of the application. I've got a short presentation for you and then a couple of additional things that have come in late. So I'll trip through this in deference to the very long report you have in front of you. There are no objections from statutory internal consultees subject to conditions of mitigation secured through legal agreement where possible, where appropriate. The county archaeologists and the active travel teams considered that additional information should be required in advance of determination, but officers consider that given the outline nature of the application, that these things can be absolutely secured at the reserve matters phase on a development of this size. There were the City of Durham Trust, Croxdale and Het and Shincliffe Parish Councils have concerns relating to the scope in particular of the transport assessments for traffic generation, for road safety and air quality, along with residential amenity, ecology and landscape and visual amenity. The parish councils and the City Trust have asked for the application to be deferred, and I'll go into a little more detail on that on the updates. We've had 122 for this morning, representations with 117 objections. The principal objections are, in terms of the City Trusts, the effect on highways and the resultant effect on the Durham City air quality area, and the extent of the travel plan with the effects on the sustainability credentials of the scheme. They were hoping for that to be far more detailed, notwithstanding the outline nature of the application. The scheme is contended not to benefit the village and that there is a lack of justification for additional commercial in this area. One of the significant objections, obviously, for the local residents affected by this is that the BDR enables additional... skipped one there. The scheme does not benefit the village and there's a lack of demand for the commercial, and that there is additional residential development that could be justified as part of this, most notably in the gap between where the bypass goes across the field and hits north. The BDR is considered to be significantly unreasonably affect the residential amenity of the Grange village, and that's something we have looked into very carefully and no doubt we'll discuss as part of the debate here today. There are also wider concerns for coalescence of Bowburn and Shincliffe, for the effect on heritage assets, for drainage, the existing and proposed rail links, the effect on the green belt, devaluation of properties, ecology, green space, BDR. Bowburn and Park Hill Community Partnership have written in support. They note that although they're winding down, they have been a long-term proponent of this, safeguarding the BDR and the Phase 2 route, having supported and encouraged it and they suggest traffic restrictions through the village itself to try and further direct traffic from the existing main road through the village from Durham Road and around the bypass. They're asking to ensure that the connections to the existing industrial estates, which we discussed this morning, are achieved and prevent further traffic crossing the East Coast Main Line. That is something that the developer wishes to do on the early stages before the early stage before the underpasses have gone in, so they can get access to the west part of the site. If I could just at this stage then, if this is the representations, we do have additional objections from Cassop-cum-Quarrington Parish Council, who again are concerned about the effect on roadways, particularly on junction 61 onto the A1M, on the A66 at Harvey Way and the roundabout there, and onto the 177 at Junction 61 and the Junction 61 Park Hill exit. Effectively, the approaches to the site from Coxo and the east. Shincliffe Parish Council have written further and request determination be deferred until a transport assessment or a pendum properly evaluates traffic impacts on the extended A177 corridor through the Shincliffe Parish. The parish does include part of the site right at its very northern extent, but they're asking for works effectively a long way north from that. As we pointed out this morning, from where the road started to the signalised junction on the B1198 at Shincliffe Village and onto Holgarth Street roundabout. Had an additional public objection, a single one, which complains about the potential for the effect on the fire service. I think that was from a fire officer, and they complain about potential security challenges that might come with phase 2 in terms of police incidents on building sites or unoccupied sites. I've had 2 more letters of support. One from Business Durham, who consider the development will amplify the economic development of Integra 61 and ensure Durham remains agile and responsive to business needs. And finally, another late representation from Mary Foy MP, who points out that since the boundary changes, she is not the MP for this area anymore, but has historically supported this. She says the economic disparity forces thousands of Durham residents into long-distance commutes, placing a strain on their well-being and the local economy. The proposed second phase is more ambitious than the first by securing a further 3.2 million square feet of employment space. This expansion is estimated to create up to 4,500 jobs during the construction and operational phases and generate an additional 170 million in economic output for the North East. To summarise the extensive report in front of you, both Integra 61 and the BDR are safeguarded in the CDP in policies, and those policies have been obviously examined by a planning inspector and found reasonable in their extent and intentions. That inclusion as a policy in the plan gives compliance with policy 10, development in the countryside of the county plan, and that's significant. The application has been submitted with an infrastructure delivery plan and a travel plan, and that offers through Section 106 agreement £540,000 for funding bus services, which will secure, in addition to the additional bits and the additional components of the travel plan, which is secured in detail in your listed conditions, the sustainable travel options, something that was a concern of the parish councils, and encourage a modal shift to those types of access to employment and employment sites. Landscaping effects are significant, and this is acknowledged by the landscape officer and in the report, and they will be controlled. We have structural planting belts proposed around this, and they will not screen it. The size of the buildings is such that they will soften the edges of it, and it's as important as getting the right types of buildings in the right locations, hence those the levels that I referred to on the plans reflecting the existing landform, and also getting the buildings of the right colour. You've seen in the photographs to date and on the visit this morning how correct colour choice or poor colour choice can exacerbate these or mitigate these structures' inclusion in the landscape. Highway safety has been fully assessed and is concluded to be policy compliant. With the late representations from the parish councils, and particularly concerns on this issue, this is something that's been subject to a lot of debate. Have to remind members that paragraph 116 of the NPPF says that development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network following mitigation would be severe, taking into account all reasonable scenarios. There's a lot of concern for the effect on the junction of the motorway from the parish councils, but National Highways, who are the governing body for that, have written to say they have no objection to this. So the statutory highways consultees are content and that the effect on that both in terms of what's proposed here and acknowledging that some of these effects have been front-loaded in the recent improvements to the approaches to the roundabout as well. There will be slight delays as part of this application, but not to a point where it comes anywhere near the policy test in paragraph 116. The highways officers have considered that the submitted travel assessment indicates that the development is expected to generate 292 trips onto the A177 at the peak hour. That's 63 northbound and 229 southbound. Now, I don't like throwing figures at you at these things because it's cherry picking out of reports, and it's you can make figures say anything you want, but effectively and more tellingly, this equates to an average of approximately 1 vehicle travelling north and 4 vehicles travelling south per minute. So when some of the percentages and some of the numbers in the reports submitted and some of the assessments look quite eye-opening, when that is filtered out across the day and across the hour, and the actual effects that we'll have on the transport network, whether it's on Junction 61 or the A177, the highways will operate well within capacity. It's important to note that the heaviest development flows from the development will be going in the opposite direction to the baseline flows at different times of the day. And there's just one more thing I'd like to read out. Effectively, it's the road capacity in terms of the A-class roads here can generally accommodate approximately 3,200 vehicles per hour. Even in peak thresholds with the total two-way peak flows, the effect on the roads here would be to generate up to 1,700. So we're well within capacity in terms of the highway layout. The effects on the residential amenity and the BDR can be mitigated to meet required standards set out in the technical advice notes that the Council have offered and in the view of environmental health officers. And as I set out on the sectional drawings you saw before, that does show worst case scenario, and potentially a detailed scheme could better those. The concerns for the East Coast Main Line and the Leamside Line raised by some residents have been found to be unfounded. Network Rail are happy to just suggest conditions to protect their assets and see no conflict with their requirements. There is, as we saw this morning, a loss of 640 metres of public footpath, and that is one of the harms that's in the planning balance. The effects of heritage assets are considered less than substantial, both individually and cumulatively, as detailed in your reports and as examined in depth by the Conservation Officer. And there are significant benefits to outweigh the identified harms. Those are set out in your report, and there are some headline ones that I think the MP set out there in terms of employment and the economic development that this development will potentially bring. More detailed in your report in terms of the effect on business rates and a split of the jobs created through the operational and construction phases. But effectively, it's worth noting that this and the BDR was safeguarded and on the basis that there was an expected time for phase 1 to build out, and that was expected to be beyond the county plan period, which was 2035. The fact that this has been built out so quickly and led to this second phase coming forward so soon, I think reflects the success of that development and the allocation in the plan, and the likely continued economic demand for this area as a significant regional hub. In conclusion, and to repeat again, the proposals in outline form with the plans showing the acceptable maximum extent of development. Reserved matters could bring these as smaller. If approved, reserved matters applications must be submitted for each part of the development, and that would come with further public consultation. Conditions for the legal agreement will mitigate the harms identified through the application, in particular with required to active travel and residential amenity. As advised by the MPPF, the development is concluded sustainable. It accords with the County Durham Plan when read as a whole, and advised by the MPPF, paragraph 11C, should be approved without delay. As ever, I'll leave you with the images on the screen, but if there's a slide you'd like to go back to, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Now, we've got quite a few speakers today. I'll just generally remind people that elected members, ward members and parish councils, you have unlimited time to speak, but please try to keep it as close to 5 minutes as possible, as we do have a lot of people speaking today. Objectors, there are three listed here. You're limited to 5 minutes between you, and I believe you've already agreed between you how long you're each going to speak for. And supporters, there's going to be one speaker. I would suggest at this point, please, registered speakers note that you can only make your representations once, but you may be asked questions by members later on. And also remind everybody, of course, to be respectful of the speakers, and please do not interrupt anyone while speaking. So we'll start with the first person listed, Councillor Stephen Ashfield for Shincliffe Parish Council. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Stephen Ashfield. I'm Chair of Shincliffe Parish Council. I'm here on behalf of the Parish Council. We are not opposed to the development in principle. Our concern is specific and evidence-based. Impact on the A177 corridor and the failure to properly assess it. The proposed Broadbird Development Road will connect the A688 at Turnsdale to the A177 within the Shincliffe Parish via a new roundabout in the current 60 miles per hour section between Bowburn and High Shincliffe. This means that the development directly feeds into our parish and also into the division of Elvit, Gilesgate and Shincliffe, something not mentioned in the original forms that have been handed in. The committee report accepts that some junctions are already marginally over capacity. In practice, once a junction is over capacity, queue modelling becomes unreliable. Delays increase unpredictably and safety risks increase, particularly rear shunts and pull-out collisions. More importantly, no junction on the A177 north of junction 61 through Bowburn, High Shincliffe and towards Mountjoy have been assessed at all. This is clearly set out in the Parish Council evidence which we have submitted. This omission is critical. Durham County Council's own highway design guide requires junction assessment where development generates more than 30 two-way traffic per hour. This development is part of a scale where that threshold will be clearly exceeded. Yet the report does not reference this policy or explain why it's not been applied. Instead, the scope of the investment is justified by what is described as an informal pre-submission agreement with a local highways authority. Members should be aware that this has not been tested against the Council's own published policy. In addition, trip rates used in the modelling have been reduced based on travel plans, assumptions, with no clear evidence base. This raised further questions about whether the modelling affects real-world conditions. The Parish Council's position is therefore straightforward. We're asking members to attach a planning condition that before any part of Phase 2 is occupied, the full A177 corridor is assessed. Any mitigation required is identified, and that mitigation is delivered and funded by the developer. This does not prevent the development, it does not delay determination, but ensures the impact is properly understood and addressed. Without such a condition, there is a clear risk that the A177 corridor becomes over capacity, with evidence to suggest that the likely cost of any further mitigation will fall to Durham County Council and ultimately to local council taxpayers, which I know members wish to avoid. So members are therefore asked to approve development where the affected corridor has not been assessed. The Council's old policy threshold has not been applied, and the financial risk of getting this wrong sits with the public. We therefore simply ask for proportionate and reasonable safeguarding. Approve the development if you consider it acceptable, but do so with a condition that the A177 is properly assessed and protected. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Now we have Richard Ormerod.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Richard Ormerod. I'm clerk to Shincliffe Parish Council. Very little to add to what the Chairman of the Council has just said. The view of the Parish Council is that what is required here is an assessment, which could be added by members as a condition. This doesn't prevent determination. But if, as the Parish Council suspects, these junctions, Bowburn, Mill Lane, Winnie Hill and Mountjoy, clog up with additional traffic, the cost of any remediation will fall on the County Council if they don't sort it out with the developer as a Section 278 agreement. In other words, as Councillor Ashfield has said, the council taxpayers would end up paying. Just very quickly, the Parish Council has asked that a couple of questions be asked and formally placed on record at this meeting. First one, the Durham County Council Highways Design Guide 30 two-way trip threshold. Could I please ask the officer to confirm on the record whether it was applied to the A177 junctions north of junction 61 through Bowburn? Second point, the report justifies the scope by reference to an informal agreement only, without reference to the authority's own published criteria. This specific ground of objection doesn't appear to have been addressed in the report. So the second question is it possible that the Parish Council can request that the correspondence on the scope of the highways advice given to Sistra is made available to committee meetings before determination? Thank you, Chair.
Apologies. Thank you very much. Now we have Councillor Gary Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak today regarding Integra 61 Phase 2 and what we call the Bowburn Relief Road. In my opinion, two different issues, but I'll get onto that. First of all, I've lived here in Bowburn for 57 years, so I think I'm quite on the understanding of what all this is about. Jobs, investment and economic growth are important, and Bowburn is not a community that stands in the way of that, and we've shown that in recent years. The Integra 61 development has already brought opportunities, and the developer has engaged positively within the community in the past, helping fund improvements such as the youth club kitchens, supporting local events like the Fun Day, and continuing to meet with the Parish Council and residents, even coming out a fortnight ago to meet us at the Parish Council. This should be recognised and it should continue. To be fair, the units themselves do not appear to be the main concern for most residents. Aside from some issues around the height visual compact, not many complaints. In fact, count on one hand how many complaints. A small number of properties near Het were the people that's really complained, including the farm. However, it would be better if all the existing ones that we have currently obviously in use first. Approval should not come at any cost, because alongside the benefits, the real and lasting impacts on residents that must be properly addressed in line with the planning policy. Personally, as I said, I haven't had many complaints regarding the units themselves. However, the Bowburn Relief Road, for decades, residents have supported, or the majority of residents have supported, the principle of the Relief Road, because the A177 runs through the heart of the village. And the impact of heavy goods vehicles is not theoretical, it's real. There are homes where residents have had to reinforce their properties due to constant vibration from passing wagons. We see speeding traffic, increasing volumes and ongoing safety concerns, particularly also near the homes and schools. Parish Council and the resident groups support the Relief Road. So yes, the majority of residents support the Relief Road and have done as long as I can remember. Like the Daleside line, people just thought it would not or even ever happen. But what they supported was the road that relieves the village, not one that simply reallocates the problem. And for that to happen, it is essential that the road properly connects not just to the wider network, but directly serves both north and south industrial estates, allowing HGVs to move from the motorway to those sites without travelling through the village, because that is what will make the real difference. Having now spoken directly with residents, particularly those near Cranston Close, it is clear that the proposed route comes much closer to homes than many people had expected. People may argue the point, why was this not brought up in searches when buying the houses, as there has been reference to the Boburn local plan and County Durham plan, I believe, for years. The relief road was to come out on the A177 opposite the jet garage. Even now, as long as I can remember, there's been drop curbs as to where it was originally going, and they're still there now. Cranston Close sits directly alongside the proposed route, and that raises a further question. Why was the builder given permission to build Cranston Close, or was it because it was within their boundaries? Was it even considered, even though potentially to be built next to a main road? Why would it not be considered, considering both the Fire Authority, which we've mentioned already, and Esh Group were both told that if the Relief Road and the Lameside line goes ahead, then the land that they asked to use back in the day would have to be put back to the original boundary so it could be built. Given the presence of the Lameside line corridor was sufficient consideration given to alternative alignment on the far side of that corridor, which could have created greater separation from existing homes. I appreciate there are constraints, but residents would want to be confident that all reasonable alternatives, particularly those that increase separation from housing, have been fully explored. Planning policy, particularly policy 29 of the County Durham plan, is clear that the development should seek to minimise impacts on residential amenity where possible. So the question is not simply whether a road can be delivered, it's whether it has been designed in a way that the best protects existing communities. Traffic impact from Phase 2, I also want to highlight the likely traffic from the Integra 61 Phase 2, because this cannot be ignored either. Even with the Relief Road in place, modelling suggests, and like the officer just said, it is theoretically, but however, on parts of the A177, it could rise by around 80%, particularly southbound through Boburn. Phase 2 will add up to 3 million square feet of industrial space and around 3,000 jobs, which will generate hundreds to thousands of additional vehicle trips per day, including a significant number of HGVs, although again, figures for jobs will depend on who buys it at the time, a warehouse with a forklift driver or a factory with many people, but we have to look on the worst scenario. The existing network already experiences regular congestion, including from the A1M along the A177 towards Durham City, particularly in Shincliffe, even though they do have a bypass. Between the A1M, the A177 and across the A68 through Tursdale past another industrial estate. Increasing pressure around the existing Integra Phase 1 site, especially at shift times and peak times from Amazon. The A1AM itself has so many tails back recently, it's just struggling to cope. So the issue is not just whether the model works on paper, it's whether it reflects the reality residents experiencing every day and what will happen when more HGVs and cars are added. Infrastructure timing, I believe the Relief Road is not to be delivered up front. It is tied to development, which triggers a problem. This raises questions under policy 21 of the County Durham plan, which requires that the infrastructure is delivered at the right time. As it stands, the impact may come first and the mitigation later. Paragraph 111 of the National Plan and Policy Framework is clear that development should only be approved where there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or a severe cumulative impact on the road network. I understand that highways officers and national highways are satisfied with the modelling provided, but residents ask what real-world assessments have been made of the existing congestion, because this is just not about models, it's about people's daily experience of traffic in Boburn and the surrounding villages. Policy 6 of the Durham County Plan seeks to minimise traffic impact and promote suitable transport, yet this proposal remains heavily reliant on road use. Bus stops already exist near the Amazon site, yet no bus service runs past or serves those jobs effectively. That is a missed opportunity to reduce traffic, particularly in commuting trips. You might say it's a small walk from Durham Road bus stop. All I will say is you try to get on a bus on a morning to go to work, as my daughter couldn't get to college in Durham. The bus was full, had to take her, like many others, in cars or pay for taxis, so people are not getting to use the buses. Residents understand that growth brings change and we want jobs, but the issue, time and again, is traffic. That is why I would urge the committee, if minded, to approve to secure stronger protections, including a weight restriction for wagons and speed controls on the A177 through Boburn, same measures to prevent rat run on local roads, particularly Taylor upon End, and appropriate speed restrictions on the new relief road. At present, vehicles, including HGVs, are travelling through parts of the village at unsafe speeds. This is not about opposing a development. It's about ensuring that if a development is approved, it's done properly in line with the policy and fair to all residents. Growth and jobs are welcome, but the impact on the village must be managed. This includes them living on the A177 and those on Cranston Close. So I ask the committee today, has everything been explored? Can it be better? Can the road go as far as the North Industrial Estates only, South Industrial Estates? With the right infrastructure in the right place at the right time, development should improve people's lives, not simply move the burden from one part of the village to another. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Now we have Councillor Ganner.
Thank you, Chair. As members will have noted from the officer, as members will have noted, the officer recommendation for this application is that it should be approved as laid out previously, and I'm here today to support that recommendation. I know, of course, that developments like this often attract some objection, and we've had some of that laid out already. And whilst I understand some of the objections, I do think it's important we view these things on balance. With that in mind, I'd like to point out some of the elements of the report that caught my attention. When one of those is, when read as a whole, the scheme is considered to comply with both the County Durham Plan and the Cassop-cum-Corrington Hill Neighbourhood Plan. Another is, in accordance with paragraph 11, again, which was laid out previously, of the MPPF, the proposal constitutes sustainable development and should therefore be approved without delay. To put it another way, this development fits well within the current policy landscape at both local and national levels. Members who have visited the site, and I know some might have done this morning, at Integra 61 will no doubt have noticed some of the substantial investment that has already happened there. Of course, there'll be different views about that development, but me personally, I'm very happy to have seen the creation of 3,000 jobs at phase 1 of Integra 61. As can be read in paragraphs 105 to 109 of the report, the next phase of the development is projected to create another 3,000 jobs, £250 million of capital investment, and an additional £1 billion of GVA over the next 10 years following its completion. The site will also leave local people with one of the most important employment locations in the region. When framed against our current economic reality in Durham, and when framed against our recent commitment to re-industrialise County Durham, for me, this is a development that we should be welcoming with both arms. Of course, the other key issue here is the transport infrastructure, and some of that's been laid out already too. Members were recently invited to a briefing on the new Leamside line, and I believe we should all be keen to see this reopened to give our residents an additional option for sustainable travel. With this development being so close to the line, and one of the stations likely to be placed within or close to this development, as far as I can see, this development is likely to add substantial impetus to the likelihood of that line being reopened. Another reason, in my view, for this application to be approved. Of course, the big bone of contention, as you will have again already heard, is the issue of the relief road, and again I understand why. Having said that, the relief road will, as Councillor Hutchinson just laid out, deal with long-standing issues around heavy traffic passing through the middle of Bolburn, an issue that many residents also feel strongly about. Regardless, though, it is important to note that this is just an outline planning application with details of the exact location of the road likely to be determined at a future committee. In that regard, the location of the road is not an impediment that should prevent the approval of this application today. All in all, Chair, I see this as a development that is, 1, an economic enabler, 2, a sustainable transport enabler, and 3, a solution to long-standing challenges with the current road through Bolburn. With that in mind, Chair and members, I fully support this application, and I encourage the members on the committee today to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We now move on to the objectors. I'll start in order I've got on the list. Lynn Hodgson, and I think you've agreed to speak for 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. A layperson and human perspective. My home lies directly on the boundary of the proposed road, just 10 metres or less than 10 metres from our property boundary. This development will have an immediate and significant impact on our daily lives. The NPPF is clear. Residents should enjoy a high standard of amenity, and developments must avoid or properly mitigate noise and visual harm. In this case, neither, in my humble opinion, have been adequately addressed. The construction of the road will bring substantial noise and visual intrusion, and the addition of a 4-metre barrier will only intensify that impact. The committee report itself accepts the significant change and impacts. The new road, in my view, doesn't solve any of the issues on the A177, it just transfers them. We've been asked to accept vague assurances, phrases like lowering the road and low noise surfacing, without any firm guarantees at this stage. These are not minor details, they are essential safeguards, yet they remain uncertain. Quite simply, that does not provide us with confidence or protection for the residents. Equally concerning is the lack of transparency in the process. Consultation has been minimal and unclear.
30 seconds remaining.
Sorry? Right, okay. Furthermore, while the report references a noise impact assessment, there is no mention of a visual impact assessment in the reserved matters, nor any meaningful evaluation of cumulative effects, particularly alongside the proposed railway reopening. I guarantee that nobody in this room would approve of this road if it was, I guarantee that nobody in this room would approve of this road if it was 20 metres from their homes.
Thank you very much. Now, Dr. David Milroy, 1 minute?
Hello there. So yeah, like Mrs Hodgson, I'm also a resident of Cranston Close. I've got 2 short points to put to the committee. The first is just building on Lynn's point around Reserved Matters Condition 13 in the Planning Committee report. So as it stands, this includes, the condition of the developer carrying out a detailed noise impact assessment prior to the road becoming live. And whilst we welcome that, we think that the noise impact assessment alone is wholly insufficient. And as it's not just noise that will result in a loss of amenity for us residents, like the visual impact of the development, particularly erection of a proposed 4-metre acoustic barrier, must also be assessed in order to build a full and accurate picture of the cumulative impact. And to help us identify effective mitigation measures. I therefore urge that this condition is amended to include a visual impact assessment as a condition also. And then finally, my second point is relating to alternative routing options. I think Councillors Genner and Hutchison have touched on this. I think practical solutions, like alternatives could be like running the road from the...
Thank you, Dr. Milroy. Thank you. And now Matthew Phillips, 2 minutes.
I'm speaking on behalf of the City of Durham Trust. The applicant describes Integra 61 as a highly sustainable location, but the Department for Transport's connectivity tools scores the site in the bottom 30% of employment locations for sustainable transport access. The trunk road connections are excellent, but transport choice for employees is not. In Condition 11, your officers propose an infrastructure delivery plan to address deficiencies in the surrounding walking and cycling network. Please seek out clarity from the officers that the audit will assess routes not just within Boban, but as far as Durham City and Spennymoor, with potential for a significant contribution from the applicant towards creating safe routes, giving people an alternative to driving. Alongside infrastructure, a travel plan to reduce the impact of road traffic is crucial. The applicant has submitted one. It promises the Integra 61 website will include information about sustainable transport, including travel planning. This sounds great, but the appalling truth is that almost exactly the same travel plan with exactly the same promise was submitted in 2015 with the original application for Integra 61, and there is still no information on sustainable transport on their website 11 years later. In submitting an almost identical plan, there is no evidence that the applicant has learned from or even implemented the previous travel plan. Other empty promises repeated with this application are the car parking management strategy, said to be essential by the travel plan, the car share and car club schemes, cycling and walking incentives, and public transport discounts for the employees. I therefore urge the committee to require a full travel plan, properly implemented, and to amend condition 12 to require a silver level plan, not just bronze. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have James Taylor for the Citrus Group, and I think you're speaking, and the other two listed are going to answer questions if asked. Okay.
That's correct, Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. We're very pleased to have this application before you today. I would like to thank your officers for their support and professionalism in consideration of this application. As many of you will know today, this land before you, subject to this application, has been safeguarded since 2004, goes back to the City of Durham plan days, as a further phase, recognising many years ago the importance of employment land along the A1M corridor. We are only able to bring this land forward now on the back of the success of Phase 1 and anticipation of the future demand. Phase 1 has thus far generated 2,000 plus jobs, including, of course, the large Amazon distribution centre, and is now an important part of Durham's economy, with its strategic location and ability to generate employment and growth. Achieving planning today is a crucial first step towards building out the second phase of up to another 3 million square foot and creating more jobs for County Durham. The journey to establish Integra 61 has been a partnership from the outset and continues to be so, with many stakeholders involved, not least the local community bodies, the County Council, who have funded and sought funding from others, particularly for off-site improvement works to the highway, or both the local and strategic road networks. This second phase will deliver valuable employment opportunities in a key strategic location, circa 3,000 jobs, a mix of industrial, storage and distribution floor space, representing an investment of circa 250 million into the economy and business rate net income of several millions per annum, creating one of the largest business parks in the region, certainly in more recent times. Once fully operational, the scheme could generate up to 100 million of additional economic output per annum. We worked very hard before and during the submission to design an indicative outline scheme which is deliverable in engineering terms, both in scale and mass. For a scheme of this size, just achieving outline consent is not enough in itself. It must be able to be physically delivered on site. We are very cognizant of the concerns from the number of neighbouring residents, and where possible we have sought to engage in good faith to share information and have minimised and embedded our impacts. Some of the things mentioned earlier around the noise bund, the lowering of the road, that is embedded. Boburn Development Route or Boburn Relief Road, depending on how far you go back, has been a long-held aspiration for the community of Boburn, dating back to 2008 and the village plan. The objective of which was indeed to take heavy traffic from the Boburn's north and south industrial estates away from the street, an issue that continues today. We are seeking outline permission for the BDR as part of this application, combining the original purpose but also serving the future expansion of Integra 61. Whilst the intended route has largely remained unchanged across the years and is shown within the current County Durham plan, we do recognise the change in outlook and character that the residents nearest the road at Cranston Close will experience, and I completely understand why they would choose not to have a road to the rear of their properties. But from a planning perspective, which is ultimately the test here today, we have demonstrated that a policy compliant road and acoustic barrier can be built, and it is deliverable on the route that was always envisaged. Your officers have constructed a fair and balanced report. It is extremely rare that a development of this scale, which brings such wide economic benefits, has no impact on residents. But where possible, these impacts have sought to be either embedded and mitigated as much as we can through good design, as set out in the officers' report. Therefore, we ask that members support the officers' recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, back to the officers, Steve, but I think a few of the other officers here will want to chip in as well. Okay, so over to you first.
apologies. If I could have a brief word about the residential amenity effects, then I'll hand over to my colleagues from Highways to respond to some of the issues that's been raised about that. In terms of the BDR, the scheme that's set out with the 4 metre high acoustic fence with the 10 metre separation in the, might appear, but also an acceptable one in terms of the visual separation from the back of the houses at nearly 20 metres, the opportunity for the landscaping strip in between. And it's fair to say that the landscape officer was quite surprised at how it's been presented, given the opportunity for obvious betterment for that in terms of landforming, retaining walls, planting and the like. But those are matters for the reserve matters process if you decide to approve it today. Effectively, what is shown, like I say, I don't like using the word worst case scenario because it sounds as if it's bad, but that scenario has been found to be acceptable in terms of the expected standards for noise, for dust and particulates, and for residential amenity that we use. I know the first response of the environmental health officers was to raise concern about this, and that's as much because the starting point, the baseline for assessing this is so low, because effectively at the moment it is countryside behind it. It's not as if you're building in the context of a cumulative effect of existing urban development and traffic movements and the like. The technical advice notes that the council sets out, which is in line with best practice for how the planning system looks at those issues, it meets the standards required in those, and potentially, like I say, through reserve matters application, there is the opportunity for betterment of them. But in its current circumstances, we would struggle to refuse this, recommend a refusal as officers for this, because it meets those standards that we've got set out. So there will be, and you know, in the report, which is as honest in terms of setting out the harms for your assessment here today, there will be an impact on this. There will be a significant change to the residential environment there, but that environment meets the standards that are required. And the applicant has set out in their updated information on these topics that in comparing it with other residential environments, such as the outside edge of the Persimmon estate on the A688, you know, this is still an improved scenario on that, and that's been an accepted relationship in the past. So ultimately, these things could be improved through reserve matters in the future, but at the moment it does meet the required standards to get the planning officer's approval. I will hand that over to my colleagues in Highways now, if I may, because they'll better explain those dimensions of the scheme. Thank you.
I think the only thing I really wanted to pick up on, Chair, is this thing about the 30 trips, which and why it's not policy compliant. I think, unfortunately, the Parish Council have misunderstood what it says. The Highway Design Guide says that any development likely to generate 30 or more trips requires an assessment. It doesn't set a threshold for when a junction needs assessment or scope, and it simply says anything that will put 30 trips onto the network requires an assessment. This does, and there's been a transport assessment submitted with the plan application.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and cover, obviously there's been lots of points raised there around wider highways, and I'll try and give some of that strategic context if I can, and cover the points and some of the concerns that have been raised. So specifically around the Boburn development route. So as the route is safeguarded, but the application for that route will be coming forward separately from the authority at a later date, as this is likely to be funded through the combined authority. Therefore, as part of that application, we're able to engage with those residents impacted and concerned about the proximity of the road and the mitigations around noise and other considerations as part of that process. So we're more than happy to engage with the residents who've obviously made representations today around that. As has been mentioned, obviously the route is safeguarded. There's a reasonable expectation from the residents of Boburn Village that the development impacts will be mitigated, and the route was identified with that in mind. Appreciate there was concerns raised about the proximity to properties. I would just offer context to that in terms of the proximity to the properties around the Grange being, I think, was cited as 10 metres. The current proximity of the road to property St Bobin is 2. It's quite a stark difference, and anyone who does a noise assessment will know how quickly noise dissipates based on distance and proximity of that source of noise. So whilst we acknowledge there will still be noise to be mitigated, it's a much more manageable amount to do so, and obviously the acoustic barriers and things that we can integrate in our design can address that. Similarly, and as the planning officer mentioned, the finished level of the road, currently, use our phrase worst case example, is at its highest. There is opportunities, given the relative level of the Leamside line adjacent, that we could further drop that. That might obviously come with costs, but we're in a position now where we can put that into our proposals at an early stage and therefore try and further reduce the need for those acoustic barriers and the height and therefore the visual impact that they might cause. So hopefully that covers the sort of the specific elements of the Bowburn development route. What I'd say, sort of wider context to here, is the Bowburn development route, as I say, is reliant on some external funding, but it's a mayoral priority, so it is a commitment from the combined authority, and the council are already working with the combined authority to secure that funding and to develop that proposal. We would expect, unfortunately not by today, but we expect in the very near future to be announcing something positive to that effect, and therefore be coming back to this committee at some point with a planning application seeking approval to deliver a road. But as has been mentioned by those who've been speaking, the Leamside line is a key catalyst here, and the Bowburn development route does two things. It both potentially unlocks that in terms of access, but also it gives access to intercept journeys that currently occur along the A177 and from the A1. So I completely acknowledge the concerns around the A177 corridor as it runs into Durham, but the opportunity that the Leamside line would present, especially if there's a station sited in Bowburn, is to intercept some of those journeys, but also as part of that proposal around the station, we would look at what we call the last mile connectivity. So that would be active travel routes to that new station, one of which corridors would likely be the A177 corridor into Durham. So whilst that isn't with this application today, it's just to give comfort that these risks and concerns are being addressed as part of the work that we're preparing and will come forward as part of the Bowburn development route in due course. I'll happy to answer further questions on that, but pause for there. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I'm sure there'll be further questions. Can I bring in environment at this point? Mark and Patrick, either of you want to add something now?
Thanks, Chair. Just to, confirm my agreement with what Steve's put forward earlier, the proposed noise assessment as it is does show compliance with the relevant standards for residential amenity, and the proposed condition that Steve set out regarding the future noise assessment and mitigation measures to follow should continue to ensure sufficient residential amenity there. I appreciate what's been said today by David and Lynn that the local residents will perceive an impact there, and yes, they do have my sympathies, but it is meeting residential amenity standards. That's what the report's demonstrated, and I think the proposed condition, as worded, should ensure that the residential amenities minimise going forward and that potential impact. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think nothing else you want to add at this point, Steve? No. So I'll throw this open now to questions to the members. Councillor Picard, Bellingham, Wilkes.
Yeah, just a question regarding the Relief Road. How long is it and what's the speed limit? Can anyone tell me?
I don't have the exact measurement, but it's intended to be designed for initially a 50-mile-an-hour limit. It could be reduced to 40 if that's going to be required to meet the noise and acoustic thresholds.
Right, so I would have said even a 10-mile-per-hour difference on a 44-ton Arctic would make a difference on noise. So if you can reduce it to 40, if that's possible to do so, can we do that? Because you're having to raise a 4-metre acoustic fence, some big garish fence along the route. So if you can mitigate sound just by reducing the speed of the trucks, and also it'll have a physical impact because people will be able to feel the trucks. A lady said she was 10 metres away, her boundary was 10 metres away. is there a possibility to reduce it further? Because I do drive onto depots around the country, and a lot of the time it's reduced to 20 mile an hour, and this isn't built up residential areas or anything like that. So can we possibly look into implementing a truck going at 20 mile an hour would be significantly quieter, and it might even mean you don't have to erect the acoustic.
Considered in terms of 50 and 40, that's probably within our gift. Anything below that, I think, would then result in just people still cutting through Bulburn. So I think that's the risk that we're playing with there. So 40 would be the lowest we could do. I think, as I say, the measures that I mentioned earlier that are probably more effective would be the finished level of the road in terms of putting it more of in an embankment, sort of in a cutting, sorry, so that we're reducing the finished level of the road and therefore reducing the consequential height of any acoustic barriers required.
So we're putting it deeper?
Basically.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. So 40 mile an hour and then try and put it deeper?
That'll certainly be within our gift to look at that.
Right, okay, cheers.
Can I just ask, Patrick, the need for the fence would still be there, wouldn't it, regardless of the speed?
Yes, it would still be a requirement.
Councillor Bellingham.
Thank you, Chair. Dawn Bellingham, Horden and Dean House. Just want to ask a question about Bulburn Beck. This is going to be running through the site. Has it been assessed, analysed for risk of contamination? Because obviously we don't know what type of businesses are going to be used on this site once they've been built. Is there any business continuity planning with that, both through the development and beyond? Thank you.
Yes, there has been discussions and repeat discussions on this through the course of the application, obviously with the beck and the dark corridor and the wildlife implications, and then the suds along that beck as shown on the plans. And I think it was a concern that was also raised by the residents of Het Mill, the property next to the railway line this morning that we went past. It's a revised and updated flood risk assessment has been submitted as part of that, and that was discussed with our drainage officers who look at filtration strips between next to highways, so that the runoff water coming off the public highway is treated before it goes into the natural environment, and that there are receptors for contaminants on site. So that would form part of the detailed flood risk assessment that would be a strategic document that oversees the whole of the site. And then obviously each reserved matter application in its own right would have to provide for its own mitigation in terms of both the surface water runoff and treating that runoff so it's clean by the time it gets to Bulburn Beck.
Councillor Wilkes.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Mark Wilkes from Wilgate in Newton Hall. I've got 4 questions regarding the conditions or lack of them. Just move this up a bit. Seems to be rattling a bit. Okay, condition 9 refers to the Bulburn development route only needing to be constructed when there's 50% floor space occupied, unless 478 two-way trips have not been exceeded. So is it possible that the number of two-way trips might not only be reached until there's 60 or 70 or even 80% occupancy? And surely, are these conditions not too lax and would mean Bulburn residents potentially waiting years to have the relief road and having to deal with the increased traffic? So on this condition, I believe we could change this to ensure that the road is built by simply changing the condition to say 50% occupancy or 478 trips, whichever comes first, and would officers be satisfied with that? The second issue is regards to HGVs, and there's an ongoing issue in this area, particularly at Tersdale, with lack of facilities for HGV drivers, and it's resulted in some pretty distasteful behaviour, including the use of a local byway as a toilet. Phase 1 didn't include any overnight HGV parking area or facilities for HGV drivers, and Phase 2 apparently doesn't either and doesn't have any condition. And I think this could be addressed at this point as that outline application. If the developer will commit to an area for 24-hour HGV parking with restroom facilities, and if they're not willing to do it, can we condition it? Because people, and you'll see it in the press this week again, it's been going on for years, people are getting very angry with what's going on with that situation. The third condition, Chair, I've had to deal when I was cabinet member with the air quality management issues in Durham City. Now, if we're going to route even more HGVs through Durham City, we're going to significantly increase pollution levels in the city, which will then mean that as a council, we'll be in breach of our legal obligations to the Environment Agency, and we'll end up spending a pile of money trying to address that. I don't see any restrictions or conditions here related to restricting HGV travel along the A167 from Durham City. And I actually agree with the parish councillor, chair, and with the clerk, and with the county councillors. So to remove any financial risk to the council, can we agree to, as a condition, to put a weight limit on the A167, which would then require those HGVs to actually use the A1, and it would actually significantly reduce a lot of the concerns and impacts that residents in both Shincliffe and Boburn have already raised in this meeting. The final thing is that if we're going to have this massive increase in traffic through Shincliffe, I think it's now imperative that that speed limit is reduced and that it's conditioned as part of this application to reduce the speed limit along the A167 to 30 miles an hour, because residents have been asking this for a very long time. So just to recap, we can require the road to be built earlier by changing the condition? Can we get a commitment of a restroom and HGV stop, or condition it? Can we condition a weight limit on the A167? And can we require a reduction in the speed limit through Shincliffe to 30 mile an hour? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Right. I think, Nick, do you want to come in there first? And
I'll think it's a double up between myself and Phil on the highways matters. In terms of the concerns around the air quality, obviously part of, as we've mentioned, which is forward, one of the key things that will hopefully support is an additional park and ride site for Durham City. That would then run services along the A177, and as you'll be aware, part of the air quality management action conditions is to reduce traffic by modal shift, and that's why we've got obviously the effective park and ride system we've got at the minute in terms of Belmont and up at Sniperley. So this will have, we hope, a similar effect in terms of converting those trips on the perimeter rather than allowing them to flow all the way along the A177 where there is that air quality management area. In terms of restrictions on HGVs, that's a little bit more difficult because that depends on ultimately where those HGVs are destined. Obviously there may be businesses along there who need those HGVs to have access rather than there's a strategic route through or around Durham in terms of the city. Obviously there are key routes that are advocated for HGV usage, i.e. that they are designated appropriate in terms of their road classification and widths, and I believe that section of 177 fulfills that. I think there are other routes that have restrictions on them in terms of weight limits on bridges, but also low bridges that make things more difficult to just reroute, but we'd be happy to take a look at that in terms of a highways response to that. I'll pass over to Phil in terms of the speed limit. Sorry. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I don't think that a requirement to reduce the speed limit is something that could be put on this plan application. Clearly, it's something we can look at separately through as the local highway authority, but there's nothing within this planning application or the evidence to it to suggest that you would need to do that. That's a separate matter linked to existing conditions on the road that have to be speed surveys done, that have to be, you know, you'd have to consult with the police, and it would have to be credible. So I don't think it could be put on this planning application, but it's certainly something the Highway Authority can look at separately.
Chair, could I come on back in on those comments from the officers, please?
I think there was just one more point, but if you want to just come in on that, but
yeah,
the question about stop-off
yeah, so just in terms of the air quality management area, we have a legal obligation. The Leamside line, I guarantee you, will not be operating in 5, 10, 15 years. We know how long it takes for a rail project of that size. It's 200 to 500 million pounds. It's simply not going to happen in the next couple of decades, okay? It might well in 20 years be there, but in that period of time between now and then, we will have hundreds of additional HGVs going through Durham City. So I don't agree with your point in relation to that. And I think that we really do need to address this. And I also think that you can put access-only restrictions for HGVs, and it can be monitored by us, and we can then fine companies that are breaching it. So I don't see why that particular condition couldn't be put in. And regarding speed limit reductions, we had a housing development in Pittyme at the Finkel Training College site where it was put in that there would be a review of the speed limit, and the developer was required to put money in That speed limit was reviewed, albeit it took a bit of time, and has now been reduced. So I don't see that there's any reason why we can't include that as a condition, that it is reviewed as part of this application. Because let's be honest, we've already seen, what, is it 1 fatality or 2 along that stretch of road? This is a significant development. You're talking about 3,000 jobs. We've got existing problems in Shincliffe Village. I don't see why we can't put these conditions in now. They're not even massively expensive conditions, to be perfectly honest. The only other thing was the other issue that I raised about the HGV stop, Chair.
Going to intercept on that point. I think, Steve, you want to mention something there.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and I appreciate this is something which members will be aware of from the planning training and the long experience in terms of sitting on planning today. But we can only really attach planning conditions to something that bites on the merits of a planning application. And just picking up on Mark's, on Councillor Wilkes' points about having a HGV welfare facilities, well, you know, there's just no way that this development on its own, in isolation, would generate a need for that type of wider community social facility to be provided as part of the development. So we'd be well out of kilter with the relevant planning condition or Section 106 tests if we were to try and pin something on this development, Chair. There is, just being reminded, just having a quick look on Google Maps, that we do have the Bolburn, the Durham service station only, I think fair to say, a spitting distance off this site. But notwithstanding the fact that legally we just couldn't pin that type of ask on this planning application, it would lead to a significant amendment to the planning application, no doubt significantly changing the layout and all the environmental and highways reports that have underpinned the planning application. I'm sure it's something the developer would have a view on as well in terms of how it would affect the viability of the scheme. But so just to be clear that we really couldn't go down that route, but I'm sure between myself and Nick we're more than happy to take the point away and no doubt work with Highways England to see is there any strategic work to be done looking at opportunities in the area as part of that. In terms of the Finkel College development, I do recall that site well, as I'm sure Councillor Wilkes does, and from memory there was a specific and I think probably a more heavier accident record issue in the vicinity of that site. Notwithstanding that, we did legally take the same view as what Phil has put forward there, that really it isn't for the planning system to look to change planning speed limits as part of a condition of planning approval. Again, so I'm sure Laura would support me here to say that legally we just cannot do that. But my recollection in terms of Councillor Wilkes' points is that we worked with the developer there who voluntarily put forward a sum of money to allow a speed reduction survey to be undertaken. So I think possibly just to correct members, if I may, that there wasn't a planning condition applied to that approval to restrict the speed limit per se. We couldn't do that, but there was a voluntary contribution put forward off the house builder, which then was fed through Nick's team to get some survey assessment work undertaken. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think there was one point Councillor Wilkes raised about the trips triggering, I think, the development route coming forward. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, apologies, yeah. I didn't cover that one. So the reason for the condition having those two options is obviously the need for a relief road is based on the traffic it generates, not just the amount of space that the site is occupying. Obviously, there'll be quite a range of end users on this site, so depending on the number of trips that those end users generate, that is a more appropriate trigger, which is why the conditions are written in that way, as opposed to just an arbitrary 50%. It needs to be more dynamic because it's when the need to mitigate those trip impacts occurs, rather than just, as I say, a point in time of when the site is occupied at a certain percentage.
Thanks, Nick. Now, Councillor Bell, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Alan Bell, Lumley and West Drayton Division. It's good to hear Steve mention about the welfare area that could be looked at down the line. It's obviously not for this committee, but I'm sure the local members, I know Gary and Jan have brought it up regularly about the lay-by down there being used for toilet facilities at the end of the terrace street there. So that would be a brilliant one to look at. Definitely needs looking at. Again, it was what Councillor Hutchinson brought in, was it was hard to believe that there's not a bus service to such a site for so many so many employees going to this site. Again, it might not be for this committee to decide, but if there's a travel plan like comes in on full application, that would be a win-win situation, I'm sure.
So the question, Councillor Bell, about the travel plan?
Yeah, it was an observation just to say, if that's looked at on a full application on reserved matters, obviously I didn't see that in the outline permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, who wants to go on? Steve?
Sorry, yes. There is a contribution, obviously, in the Section 106 agreement for this to embed at a particularly early stage, potentially the bus services into this site of £540,000. And I think it's also worth flagging up that whilst it's been painted that Phase 1 performs poorly in terms of sustainability and transport links and how it's delivered those. There is a range of footpaths and cycleways that both through that development connecting up the commercial and the residential phases of that, which will be spread into this development. And as I pointed out on the presentation for this, there are 2 routes into this development, one of which will be the principal transport route. The second one is for emergency services, because we always need a second way through, but also that will be principally for the cycle and pedestrian connections as well, which can connect into this and into the bridleway network beyond for cycles and the footpath network for footpath users. So it's not just serving the users of Phase 2, but it connects into the wider footpath network as well.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Freeman.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor David Freeman, Elford, Charlesgate and Shincliffe Ward. I would like to support Councillor Wilson, what he said about the need to do something on the A177. Reading the report, I do feel it's a bit inadequate, well, more than inadequate, about the impacts from Durham City to the Integra site in terms of the substantial increase in vehicle numbers, which are at peak times 32% increase in numbers on a road which, as Councillor Wilkes has said, is very fast, very dangerous, very unsafe to cross. So I think we should be looking at that, even though officers don't seem minded to agree to that. I know that isn't a question, so I'll get on to the questions which we've just heard from Councillor Bell about bus routes, and I've heard from the planning officer about a potential bus route, but also about walking and walking on site. I think my question would be, which has been raised by Matthew Phillips from the City of Durham Trust, about what happens when you leave that site in terms of safe footpaths. I know that he suggested that a travel plan looking at access to Durham City from the site should be included as part of the condition, in condition 12. I'd like to know the officer's view on that, because certainly you could walk off this industrial estate but then be faced by a very busy and quite dangerous road to walk along, and certainly you would have great difficulty crossing the A177 at virtually any time of the day. We don't seem to be building that into this. And then just going on to the Leamside line, like many members, I was at a workshop last week looking at the Leamside line, and Councillor Wilkes is correct that it's possibly 20 years away. So I don't think we should be putting too much onus on how the Leamside line can improve air quality into Durham City when we may never actually have a railway line there. But the line of the line is there. We have an industrial estate here already. We're substantially increasing that, potentially 6,000 people working there. And we don't seem to be doing anything in terms of servicing that industrial estate from this line that goes through it. And, I think that seems to be a flaw, that in terms of getting vehicles, particularly HGVs, off the road, we could, in a number of years, have a railway line there, and there should be some sort of freight capacity built into this development, but that doesn't seem to be in this application, and certainly the land doesn't seem to have been allocated for some future use as a freight facility. Thanks.
Thank you. I think the point on the travel plan, if you could mention some more about that, because it is a recommendation that there be a travel plan. will that be covering the issues that Councillor Freeman has raised?
It is. There's a condition for a travel plan as part of that. The standard of the travel plan is something the City Trust has asked to be updated, and I don't know if the applicant wants to comment on the potential for that. But it is an aspect of the scheme that has been assessed. Usually, and I think it's fair to point out at this stage, the expectations for the amount of information that we submitted for you to consider this application would be greater. But we do think the condition is sufficient at the moment with the bronze standard travel plan to secure the implications for the scheme. But I don't know if you want to invite the applicant to consider whether that might be upgraded. On the other stuff, I mean, the connections or the potential for connection to the Leamside line and the undoubted benefits that would give, whether it's to the commercial activity on this site or to the village, is something that's touched upon very lightly in the applicant's submission. And I think that again reflects the nature of the outline consent. If we like to provide you with tangibles and not build it and they will come, but if the BDR is here and the economic development is here, then there is undoubtedly potential for that connection onto the Leamside line for Bulburn. But I don't want to give you the impression that that is in any way, shape or form guaranteed. I think this is it's a strategic thing. As you've said yourselves, the potential delivery of the Leamside line is in the future. But if the BDR as a consent is there, it gives more negotiating stance for that to potentially happen in the future. I think does that answer your question? But maybe put Mr. Taylor in online for a comment on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. If I can, I'll speak a bit about history of travel planning on Integra. So, funnily enough, Amazon did, when they opened, had a decent bus service, which we're very obviously pleased to see work with them to do that. That lasted for a certain period of time, but the usage of it was appalling. And they were pushing it in terms, and obviously they're by far the biggest employer in that location. So obviously, it just wasn't working for them in terms of, they'd be like one person on a bus and they were parked for the station, all the sort of transport nodes to try and intercept people that were coming to that building. And obviously they've got an entire transport interchange, a bus interchange as part of their development that they built, which is currently dormant. It's something that we want to revisit, and the plan, and we certainly haven't abandoned these objectives by any stretch of the imagination. So the 5 sheds that are on phase 1, obviously the largest of which is, and the biggest employer, is 300,000 square foot. As those get let, and they are moving in a positive direction at the moment, the plan is for us to then be more purposeful, because I think the important thing to recognise here is that Integra 61, so ourselves, manage all of this, and we'll continue to manage all of this on phase 2. So we have our own management company in place, so you have continuity from throughout the outset. But it does come down to critical mass. If you try and get the bus services to divert into here, they're just not interested. Even less so as they've witnessed how unsuccessful the first attempt of that. And it is simply about job density and the 540,000 that we are committing, which is not an insignificant sum, should allow us to kickstart that further, along with the other initiatives. We have done some excellent upgrades to active travel within the site, admittedly not off-site, but the active travel routes within the site and also the walking routes within the site are hugely upgraded to what they were. And the local links, obviously, to the front street, etc., which never existed before, do get well used. But appreciate there is also a large car-borne trips to the site, but we remain as committed to do everything we can for that modal shift, and fully accept that the Leamside line is a long way off. HGVs are part of that. I entirely agree with the officers in terms of linking that to this application, but in terms of Councillor Wilkes' comments, there is actually more commercial interest for HGV The government have changed a lot of policy on that in recent years, of realising that the facilities nationally are very poor, and there is we are in discussions with looking at different ways we can do that. It's certainly not something that I want to link to this application, but you know, that is something that we are actually engaged with, and we do recognise the concerns of the local community in that part. But it comes down to whether commercially there's a model that can actually work, and also whether the drivers will use it, which is always one of those challenges as well.
Thank you,
Thanks, Chair.
Mr Taylor. And I think you've covered it as far as you're able at this point. I mean, we are talking the bigger picture, and it's hard to put full details in at this stage. However, thanks for that. I think we've reached a point now, members, if you want to make your comments on the application, we can open the debate. Councillor Wilkes?
Yeah, I think, Chair, it would be useful to know whether or not the developer would be willing to make a contribution to that review of the speed limit through Shincliffe, as was done with the application in my area.
I think we've got to look at this in its... Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That was a long opening for that application. I think in general, you know, the site itself, it has to be said, it's a flagship site for not only for County Durham but for the area as a whole. Integra 61's been a massive success for the area, and as we see, attracting the likes of Amazon, or the blue chip companies on there. It's, you know, and to see this phase 2 come along, the applicant who's brought this before us have a proven track record, have delivered, and for that reason I've got no hesitation in moving this application for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. I'll just wait to see what the others have got to say now. Councillor Shulman and Councillor Pickard, and then Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, this application builds on farmland, and I have had to weigh up in my mind whether the farmland outweighs the application, and I have reached a conclusion that given the employment opportunities on that farmland, once it's developed, far outweighs the loss of farmland. Therefore, I'm prepared to second Councillor Bell's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Shulman. Noted. Right, now, Councillor Pickard, I think you want to say something.
Yeah, as I've already been told it's possible, I'd like to ask if we could implement a condition to reduce the relief road to 40 mile an hour and try to set it as low as possible to reduce the aesthetic impact.
Hi. So any reduction in any speed limit is a different legislation, obviously, to the planning application. It would be done through our highways team, and that's also could be something that could be looked at as a matter for reserved matters. It's not for this particular application right at this minute.
Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think this is a great opportunity to create 3,000 jobs for the local area, for the local population. It's a perfect site for it. Obviously, we've seen the success of Phase 1. It's got great transport links with the A1. It's close to Durham. You've also got the future rail link possibilities as well there. I think this is an ideal site for it. So, yeah, I'd like to give this my full support. Thank you.
Councillor Wilkes.
I sometimes feel like when we're in this committee and we say we want to try and improve an application, that it's always computer says no. I'm really concerned that we're going to end up with some serious problems in Durham City as a result of this application. And I just don't see any kind of strength coming from anywhere to address those core concerns that people have got regarding the transport issues. We know we've got an issue with air quality in the city. We know we've got an issue on this route with safety and especially with congestion. And I don't see enough here to support making sure that those issues are dealt with. So right now I'm feeling like, whilst I want the jobs, we want the development, it can't be development at all costs without addressing the core issues that we have in the World Heritage City that we have. And I really feel that we're going to see some significant negative impacts for people if we don't address these core transport problems. We've got 2,000 houses starting to be built at Snipley. There's another potential for another 1,000 houses coming in my ward. You've got 20-something thousand houses around Durham, and no infrastructure improvements. So
I think you should just address this application, the merits of this application.
I fully, and I'm
thank
about
you.
to conclude, Chair. You see, what happens is you get multitude of things happen, and it reaches a point where you simply have to say, if we're not going to fix these things, then we can't support them.
Thank you. Any other further comments here? Are we ready to... Oh, Councillor Freeman.
Thank you. I mean, it's really backing up what Councillor Wilkes has just said. Our officers saying that no further transport assessment, highway assessment is required to be, or could we ask for some sort of new highways assessment that looks again at this road and any implications that will arise as a result of this application?
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Well, I think this is a very important development which is going to benefit the county considerably in terms of jobs and investment. And I think highways have gone as far as they can do to address the highways issue, and they don't pull up any unacceptable concerns about safety or severe damage to the highway network. I think really it's very difficult to refuse this on highways grounds or to go down that line. So I think we're ready now to vote on the motion whether or not you, in support of the officer's recommendation to approve the application. All those in favour? Seven in favour, and those against? 2 abstentions. Then the application is approved. That concludes this application, so those that want to leave, take your opportunity now. Thank you.
Chair, could I possibly ask you if we got a couple of minutes if people need to pop out to the loo? Thank you.
Right, welcome back everyone. Well, the last application on the agenda, so over to Laura to present the report.
Thank you, Chair.
So item 5B relates to the erection of 104 dwellings and associated access, infrastructure and landscaping, including the proposed diversion of footpath 6 at land to the east of Daleside Cross Lane in Sacriston. So this is the application site outlined in red. It comprises approximately 6 hectares of greenfield land north of Sacriston, currently in agricultural use. The site is adjacent to the existing built-up area and well related to the settlement, reading as a natural extension to previous phases of the development. The site is bounded by the Woodland, Blackburn Watercourse and sewage treatment works to the east. Nettlesworth West House Farm is located to the northwest. Open agricultural fields lie to the north. Existing housing lies to the south and west. There's an area of higher landscape value immediately adjacent, and it adjoins the site along its northeastern edge, running along the grassland buffer, which is just that bit that extends outwards. To the south lies Fulforth Jubilee Park, with onward connections into the centre of Sacriston. The built development site comprises of 2 agricultural fields, and the site partially extends in the field to the north in the form of a buffer zone to the woodland and adjacent retained arable field. A public right-of-way, which is footpath 6, lies within the site, and it's marked on the plan to the right by the green dashed line. So here are some site photographs. The development would be accessed from Cross Lane via extensions to the existing roads of Manor Drive and Temperley Way that already serve phase 1 and 2 of the development. Photo 1 shows the existing junction between Cross Lane and Manor Drive. The point at which that this proposed to connect into the development is shown in photo 2. Photo 3 shows the existing junction with Cross Lane and Temperley Way. The point at which this connects into the development is shown in photograph 4. This slide shows a photo of the site itself. Photo 1 is looking northeast across the easternmost field. You can see the woodland edge off to the right, which includes Blackburn Watercourse with the sewage treatment lying beyond that. Photo 2 is taken looking west across the westernmost field. The hedge that currently separates the 2 fields is shown in the foreground off to the left. The existing development is visible in the background. Photo 3 shows the field to the north where the grassland buffer to the woodland is proposed. And photo 4 is just a photo from the site which shows an existing maintenance track which would be upgraded to a shared user path. And in the background you can see one of the existing suds basins associated with one of the earlier phases of development. So turning now to the site plan and the landscape master plan. Full planning permission is sought for the erection of 104 dwellings and associated landscaping and infrastructure. The development proposes a mix of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses and 2 bedroom bungalows. A total of 16 units, equating to 15%, would be provided as affordable housing. Internally, homes would be arranged along tree-lined streets, overlooking open spaces, and drainage features including swales and a detention basin are proposed. The 2 existing basins within the site, associated with those earlier phases of development, would be regraded to meet the council's current design standards, meaning they can be used as open space. All dwellings would have allocated or in-curtilage car parking with 28 visitor spaces provided. So footpath number 6 lies within the site, and it runs along the northern boundary of the westernmost field before exiting the site northwards. It is shown by the red dashed line on the plan. The revised plans include the proposed diversion of this footpath slightly south of its original alignment, as shown by the green dashed line, in order to accommodate structural landscaping along the northern boundary. The surface of this path would be improved as a result of the development. The top left image shows the site plan and the view that the visuals have been taken from, which corresponds to the numbered images thereafter, just to give you an idea of what the development is supposed to look like. The applicant is engaged with the Council's Enhanced Design Review Service, and the amended scheme was reassessed by the Council's Design Review Panel, achieving no reds, 8 ambers and 4 greens. Overall, the scheme would deliver an attractive, high-quality layout with appropriate open space, parking and integrated drainage. The applicant has worked proactively to address initial concerns, resulting in notable improvements to the scheme. The submitted active travel audit identified a number of potential improvements to walking and cycling routes, leading to the development of an infrastructure delivery plan, which is the plan currently displayed. This specifies the timescale for the delivery of a range of works, including drop curb crossings, a parallel crossing point, shared user routes both internal and external to the development, and a scheme of traffic calming, street lighting and footway widening along Cross Lane. This is supported by more detailed plans outlining the specific works proposed to be undertaken, and this forms the basis for several conditions that you'll see included within the recommendation report. If you look at the plan, the majority of the works are indicated in red, especially those that are off-site, and that means that they're intended to be delivered prior to the first occupation of the development. To further expand on some of the proposed infrastructure works that I just mentioned in the previous slide, here are some photographs of the site. Photograph 1 shows the existing public right-of-way which runs along the northern boundary of the westernmost field. So at the moment it's a track, and as I said before, it's going to be upgraded to a 3-metre shared user tarmac route. You can also see Nettlesworth Westhouse Farm is visible in the distance as well. Photograph 2 is the adjacent metal gate adjacent to the farm that's proposed to be replaced to help with noise issue. Photo 3 is the existing footpath adjacent to Daleside, that forms one of the active travel routes that's proposed to be widened and benefit from surface improvements. Photo 4 is looking east along Cross Lane, which is the area where the scheme of traffic calming, street lighting and footpath widening is proposed. Photo 5 is taken from within the site, looking south, and shows the location of the proposed parallel crossing point. Beyond that, you can see Fulford Jubilee Park, where the shared access route is proposed, which would allow better connections into Sacriston Centre. There would also be some additional street lighting in that area too. So in terms of consultations and representations, we've received no objections from statutory and internal consultees subject to relevant conditions in a Section 106 agreement to secure relevant mitigation where appropriate. Kimblesworth and Plawsworth Parish Council have raised concerns in relation to traffic levels, access to GPs and dentists, the availability of school places, and that open spaces within the development would fall within the remit of a management company rather than being managed and maintained by the council. And they were concerned also about the proposed diversion of the public right-of-way. 13 letters of objection were received in response to the initial consultation exercise. Grounds of objection can broadly be summarised as relating to the principle of development, highways and public rights-of-way related matters, residential amenity, concerns about the lack of infrastructure and the impact to that, drainage, landscape, ecology and other matters. Following amendments to the scheme, a reconsultation exercise was undertaken and no letters of representation were received in response of that. Upon publication of the committee report, we have received 3 further letters of objection, again broadly summarised from the list I provided you before. So in conclusion, the site's not allocated for housing in the County Durham Plan. It does not meet the criteria set out under policies 10 or 11, therefore has been assessed under policy 6. The site is considered to be physically and visually well related to Sacriston, being adjacent to the existing built-up area, reading as a natural extension to previous phases of the development adjacent to the site. Some distances to bus stops and some key facilities like the upper end are outside the recommended walking distances. A series of infrastructure improvements are proposed, as we've detailed, to be secured, meaning occupiers of the development would benefit from attractive, high quality and safe footpath, cycle and bus connections to access their day-to-day needs through a genuine choice of transport modes. The site is considered to be a sustainable location for housing. The proposal represents an incursion into the open countryside beyond an existing settlement edge, resulting in initial adverse landscape and visual effects at site level. However, effective landscape and visual mitigation, appropriate to the character of the locality, would be delivered through the comprehensive landscaping strategy and delivery plan. The proposal would not give rise to unacceptable or material landscape or visual harm. The site lies in close proximity to a sewage treatment works. However, following review and analysis by the Council's Environmental Health section, although on occasion odour would be noticeable, future residents would not experience a significant reduction in amenity levels, and the scheme would not likely result in a statutory nuisance. The development would result in the loss of 3.1 hectares of best and most versatile agricultural land. However, it's considered that the benefits arising from the development, including the boost to housing supply, the provision of affordable housing and associated social economic benefits would outweigh this loss and satisfy the relevant policy test. Overall, the development would build on the successful phases of development of the site and boost housing land supply, resulting in significant benefits from the delivery of housing at a time when the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. There would be significant social and economic benefits, and there would also be benefits arising from 16 affordable housing units, including accessible bungalows to meet specific needs. Limited benefits would also arise from the contribution secured towards the enhancement of public open space, from securing 10% biodiversity net gain, and from improvements to the access routes into Sacriston and nearby bus stops. Taking all matters into account, including those raised by interested parties, the scheme is considered to fully comply with the County Durham Plan when read as a whole and should be approved without delay in accordance with paragraph 11C of the MPPF, subject to the conditions and legal agreement outlined in the recommendation report. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Right, we have 3 speakers listed. Start with Parish Councillor. I apologise, I can't read my writing. Is it David Linneman?
Yes, thank you for letting me speak, Chair, at such short notice. It's Daniel Inman. I'm Clerk to Kimblesworth and Plawsworth Parish Council. The Council has a number of concerns, which I'll just try and elaborate on quickly, which you've read above. The first is to do with traffic levels, particularly in Nettlesworth. During Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the development, traffic levels increased considerably. In 2021, the school crossing patrol resigned and nobody's been able to replace them. No one will apply for the job. I've tried to seek data on this, which is held by the County Council, but Freedom of Information says it's not in the public interest and is commercially sensitive, and they would charge prohibitive amounts to make that data available. The second thing is GP appointments. Now, I understand under the system that exists, about 55,000 extra pounds, will go to the local doctor's surgery for additional provision, but people can't get appointments to that surgery. It's well known. And if you ask anyone in Sacriston, can you get an appointment in that surgery or in Nettlesworth, most will say either no or it takes a very long time. Thirdly, it's the issue with schools, primary schools in particular, and the pressure on places, and what this would do. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I don't believe there's any Section 106 money that is allocated to it, to primary schools, whereas there is for early years, but more provision would be needed there. So I'd like to end with 2 questions for the committee. The first is, why does the developer want to divert footpath 6? when it doesn't actually traverse the development. And the second relates to the early phase of development, and one reason why so much data would be needed over the road is because they had to down tools in 2020-21 for about a year. I think the Planning Committee ought to know why this is. I hope they do, but I'll just pose that as a question. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have Councillor Robson.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity of speaking. Councillor Tim Robson, Witton Gilbert and Sacriston Ward. I think it's pertinent to identify that following my parish councillor colleague speaking, that this covers two separate parish areas in respect of the Kimblesworth and Plawsworth and also the Sacriston, and it abuts via a central road known as Cross Lane. So effectively, two areas are primarily impacted upon this with regards to parish. The application is for 104 new modern homes, which add to the previous extension of this estate. And I'd like to stay here today and stay in the state quite category for the constituents of my area, that they do have deep concerns for the extension of Sacriston and also Nettlesworth and Kimblesworth parish area with regards to more homes. However, there is that need for those homes, and in taking into account, unfortunately, the issue with housing at this moment in time, I believe, is down to central government mandating targets that each county must build appropriate certain levels of residential developments. And I say this so that the public listening can be aware of where we stand today. If we do not, then we risk losing the limited control we have on planning, and the central government inspector would take over the process and elected members would take no part. And I understand also, if I stand corrected if I'm wrong, that from April, thanks to further legislation from the current Labour government, Planning and Infrastructure Act 2025, elected councillors will have even less say on applications and outcomes. And I think, following on from what I'm about to say, I think it is important that the constituents understand where the legalities and the Section 106 actually physically comes from and is formulated. Chair, I grew up looking out over cornfields, and I understand the concerns that the residents have in this area of losing, 3.1 hectares of arable land, and it's quite disconcerting to those folk who live in that area, and I make that quite clear. I do personally believe in maintaining the green belt land, particularly farmland. However, this is central government mandate, and we cannot stop. All we can do is limit development in the county by updating the county plan, which we commenced to do with this current administration. I do note that at point 9 on page 72, that the application has already been stated that in accordance with NPPF para 11C, the development should be approved without delay. And effectively, Chair, my reasoning today is just to simply question, if I may, the damage limitation with regards to the extension of this estate for the benefit and understanding of the constituents. And I understand that this will continue. There will be further developments within Sacriston. I think the public deserve the right. Back to that, Chair, I have been presented with the page 72.10, which is the Section 106 agreement, subject to legal agreement, that's under the Town and Country Planning Act as amended, to secure the following points. And I worked through those points quite a while back because I met the developer. We had a good long discussion regarding the legality and the meeting of the legislative demands regarding this application. And as has already been highlighted by my fellow parish councillor from Kimblesworth and Plawsworth, it was concerning to me that there was no funding put for education in primary and secondary, and indeed it was focused directly at the early years. Likewise, it's great to see SEND provision. However, Findoon School is already subject to a £15 million bonus this year, which moves towards developing it into a more projected and better area for special educational needs and disabilities. Querying why there's no primary and secondary is one key point of this delivery today, Chair, because I have got constituents who are saying the schools are overrun, we can't get our kids in, and further houses may cause issues. Healthcare. This is a key issue. I'm led to believe that the healthcare is a grave concern, has already been highlighted, and that the local surgeries are bulging with applications for people to come in to be treated. I'm led to believe that it's £3,000 per square metre. I'll stand corrected on that. I don't know whether that's the area or hectares or whether it comes down to the actual area of the house, but I think the public should be aware of why and how this is calculated. And this sum of £50,000, 232, will be greatly received, because I've got a number of members of my constituency who are desperate for a new surgery in the Sacriston area, and there's land available at the opposite side of the road from the current one to develop that and make for a better medical provision in the area. Moving on for that, Chair, I do have concerns regarding the traffic infrastructure. No dentists being available, but that being the case, dentists are very rare these days. And moving on, effectively, key concerns from my residents are that I understand that the Section 106 calculus is based upon local government framework. It would be nice to get a little bit of an explanation as to how the decision is made to focus funding towards the early years education provision, when clearly my constituents are demanding a higher provision of primary and secondary educational funding in that area. And then looking at education, would the figures detailed in this 106 draft summary agreement have been different should the requirements for primary and secondary have been greater than that for the early years in financial remuneration? An interesting question. Looking at healthcare, I believe that this is calculated on the 3,000 per square metre development, but it would be interesting for the public to understand the reasoning behind this so that they can understand why this development is being approved and what the benefits are for the public and residents in my constituent area. Chair, that is my delivery for today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may wish of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, we have Ollie from the developers. If you'd like to, you've got 5 minutes, okay?
Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Oliver Thompson, Land Director at Persimmon Homes, Durham. At the outset, I want to say that it's been a genuine pleasure working with the case officer and the wider council team. This application is the product of extensive pre-application engagement followed by a very constructive application process. Throughout, we have worked collaboratively, openly and proactively to address issues raised and to improve the scheme wherever possible. A key part of this process has been the scheme's progression through the enhanced design review. Members may be aware that when we entered that process, some design elements required refinement. Following several rounds of discussion with officers and the design review panel, the scheme now achieves 0 red scores. This confirms the robustness of the design and the fact that the revised layout, landscaping strategy and street hierarchy are all firmly aligned with council policy and national design guidance. 2 notable amendments were made directly in response to the feedback we received from the local community. The originally proposed diversion of public footpath number 6 has been substantially scaled back. The current proposed realignment is much closer to the existing route and has been designed to ensure a high-quality, surfaced, well-lit, shared path that remains fully accessible. The proposed footpath link to the rear of properties on Daleside has also been removed entirely. Residents made clear that this was unwelcome and we adjusted the proposals accordingly. We hope this demonstrates that we do listen and we do look to address matters wherever we can. One of the most significant improvements to emerge from our collaborative work with officers is the scheme's comprehensive package of sustainable transport measures, both on-site and off-site. These include a new cycle crossing point on Cross Lane, improving safety and encouraging active travel, widening of substandard footways and provision of drop curves around the site to create safer, more attractive pedestrian routes, upgrades to shared pedestrian and cycle paths throughout the development, and integration with and enhancements to the wider active travel network to make walking and cycling a realistic choice for day-to-day needs. These measures directly support both national and local policy goals around reducing reliance on the car and promoting healthier, sustainable modes of travel. Whilst it is widely acknowledged that Durham cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, it's extremely pleasing to note that this application is recommended for approval under NPPF paragraph 11C, meaning that the proposals accord with the development plan and the scheme does not rely on any housing shortfall. In this case, the benefits are substantial and clear. 104 new market and affordable homes, a high-quality policy-compliant layout, 16 affordable homes meeting identified local need, 11 bungalows, significant sustainable transport improvements, and up to 425k in Section 106 contributions towards education, healthcare, open spaces, public right-of-way enhancements, and SSI improvements. This is a well-designed, policy-compliant, sustainable development, and we agree with the local planning authority's recommendation that it should be approved. Many thanks for your time, and we're on hand if members have any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now, Laura, do you want to start answering the issues raised?
Hello. I'll turn to education first. So we have liaised with our educational officer, and they've given us an update with regards to the availability of school places in the area. So with regard to primary school, based on the 2 mile safe walking distances, there was 4 schools in the surrounding area. So Edmondsley Primary, Sacriston Academy, Nettleworth Primary and Witton Gilbert Primary. And based on the rules, including a surplus, there was sufficient space within them schools to accommodate the pupils generated by this development. Turning to secondary schools, we work on a 3 mile safe walking distance, and in that case it was the Hermitage Academy. Again, looking at the projected rules of the school and the build out of the development, including the required surplus to be maintained, again there was sufficient capacity at local schools. What you find with the early years and the SEM provision is that there's a county-wide shortage of that, so we tend to always secure that on every single development scheme. With regards to the NHS contribution, the payment that we've sought is based on the comments received from the CCG, and they calculate the payment based on a particular formula. So yes, at the point of time which we received the response, it was based on a £3,000 per square metre, and it goes off obviously the number of units. If local residents are interested, then the response is online, so they can actually work out how the formula is derived at. And one of the other things that resident raised is that they thought it could go towards funding like a GP. So in a response to one, I've explained it can only be used on capital projects such as creating additional consultant or treatment rooms, not on the actual funding of new GPs at the practice. I think there was also a question about the need to divert the public footpath. So if we just go back to this slide here, I can appreciate exactly what you're saying in the sense that the built development doesn't encroach upon the original alignment of the footpath. But what we've done is we've set it slightly from within the site so that we can accommodate the landscape screening for it. If we go back to the original site plan, Persimmon were originally proposing to divert it up here. So now we've got a slightly inset within the site boundary, so we've made a significant change to what they originally proposed. Hopefully that answers the questions raised today. I think there was one about highways, which I don't know whether Phil wants to come in about.
Yes, Laura, I was just going to mention the congestion issue that Councillor Linneman mentioned to Nettleworth.
I mean, again, I haven't worked on this one personally, but it's been assessed by the Highway Authority. There's been a transport assessment submitted that's looked at a number of junctions, and they're shown to work within an acceptable level.
Fine, thank you. So questions from members? Right, Councillor Bellingham, Councillor Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to get the perspective really from the planners. I do understand 106, and we do understand that it is capital only. So that is something that we do get. But considering that the parish councillors are saying that they're really struggling to get a GP's appointment now, this development, how is that going to help the residents in the future if they are unable to? They can maybe only extend the surgery, and the situation will only get worse going forward. So how is that going to help the residents? Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Laura, do you want to chip in?
So if you look at the planning obligation section of the report, so that starts at paragraph 173, we're only allowed to get contributions in particular set of circumstances that have to obviously be relevant to the development, necessary to make it acceptable, fairly and reasonably related. So we can't resolve existing problems. It's a little bit like what was referred to in the last application. We can't resolve existing problems. What we can do is mitigate the impacts of this development. This is an accepted formula that's used on all planning applications to mitigate the impact of, say, for example, NHS. As we've already discussed, it can only be used on capital projects. I'm not sure if Steve wants to come in on other things, but basically that money gets pulled together, and then once there's sufficient funds, then local surgeries would be expanded. But I'll let Steve come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to add to what Laura was saying in response to Councillor Bellingham's question there. I think, as we all know, at times in large parts of the county and large parts of the country, access to GPs and access to dentist surgeries is a national, county-wide problem, and various governments across the years have looked at different ways and different funding models with the NHS to try and improve health facilities in the round, if you like, Chair. But in terms of what we can do here, and as Laura set out, the rationale and the methodology which is contained in our adopted supplementary planning document on planning contributions, we can only ask for what we can to go towards capital. What would happen here in the event of approval is that once the money comes available, officers would work with NHS England and the money would be targeted to local surgeries. Again, we can't preempt how we would spend the money here and what improvements would be made, but I know from past examples around the county, we've seen money used to, I don't know, change storage facilities into additional consulting rooms, improve the quality of capital facilities in local surgeries that allows a greater footfall, greater number of patients to be seen in one particular day, one particular week. So the money would be used in consultation with NHS England to improve the physical capacity of the local surgery. And again, I know from a lot of examples around the county where the money has been very influential in match funding to get capacity projects on the ground and deliver improvements. But yeah, we can't use it to fund additional doctors or additional dentists, and inevitably that's something, Chair, that always falls back on the NHS and Public Health England.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkes.
Thanks, Chair. And maybe the officer could double check if there's an error at 115, because it seems to suggest that there's 8 ambers, but when I look at it, there's 4 ambers and 8 greens. I think I'm right with that. I'd be interested to know, because it doesn't really explain in enough detail, in terms of the affordable rental units, whether any of the affordable rental units are actually bungalows, because that isn't clear in the report, and whether or not the developer would consider that, given the number of people who are on waiting lists for bungalows in that area. I have to say, management companies are an absolute nightmare for the residents who end up living on these estates, and we should be avoiding them at all cost. So I'd like to know if we've actually asked the developer, if we've specifically even asked them if they will hand over the open space to us rather than setting up a management company, because it's an absolute nightmare. I've got people in my area, most people have probably got them in their area now, most councillors. And then specific concern that we have a policy about how far a development should be from the nearest bus route. And every time we have an application coming in at the moment, we're getting told, oh, it's more than the 400 metres. In this case, the nearest bus stops are more than 800 metres from the nearest, from the centre of the site. And I'm just wondering, at what point do we actually afford any kind of merit or weight to this, when we're supposed to be trying to make sure that we've got sustainable development? And how can it be sustainable if it's double or more the distance to the nearest bus stop?
Thank you. Laura, starting with the Ambers.
I believe I have made a typo. It's 8 greens and 4 ambers. I was just trying to frantically check for the design review score, so I'll do that in the background. In terms of the affordable housing, the mix is set out in the report, but it is all housing units rather than bungalows. The developer is obviously here today. You can ask them, but obviously we've done all our market valuation reports and things like that based on the properties that are being put forward. I appreciate your comments about the bus stops, and obviously we do rather that they fall within the 400 metres. I wouldn't say that they're as bad as, you know, double or excess of that. Off the top of my head, it was between 690 and 780 metres from the site, so I appreciate that is on the upper end. But we have secured a series of improvement measures to get to that, like footpath widening, street lighting, drop curbs at those bus stops. I'd also think it's important about the number, the frequency, and the desirability of the destinations that these buses are going to. So we've had to kind of look at it in the round, not just look at distances alone. And based on that, we were satisfied that it was accessible, and there was no objection raised from either Active Travel or our Highways Department Integrated Passenger Transport team.
Thanks, Laura. There was a question about open space. I think there's more than required, but the issue is whether it could be taken out of the hands of a management company.
As part of our negotiations with the developer, then we asked them how open space within the development is proposed to be managed. At that point, they obviously outlined their request for it to be a management company. So we're going to go above and beyond in some ways of what's secured under the open space strategy. So, for example, the public rights of way that runs through the site, those paths and things would fall within the remit of the management company as well, because highways wouldn't be prepared to adopt them. But the developers here, you can obviously ask them if they would be prepared to change their mind.
Thank you, Laura. Councillor Wilkes, yes, you want to come back on that?
I think it would be useful to ask the developer on both those points that you mentioned. But I would just raise the point that the active travel plan, access to public transport, was clearly stated as an area concern by the active travel officers. And it actually says, although not stated in the latest transport submission technical note, it is observed that the nearest bus stops to the site are located in excess of 800 metres from the mid-dwelling of the site. That's not sustainable.
I think they may be in relation to an earlier iteration of the development. Like I say, we've progressed amendments to the scheme, and we've since had more up-to-date comments from Active Travel. No objection was raised, and like I say, the distances aren't as excessive as what you're quoting with the 800 metres from the midpoint dwelling. It's between 690 and 780.
Thanks, Laura. I think just to add to that, Chair, I think it's a fair point that Councillor Wilkes raises. In terms of proximity to bus stops, the site isn't the best, and there's no hiding that. But I understand from talking to Laura and Steve over the last couple of weeks what we've done with the developer here. And we've had a very positive, receptive response from the developer. Is that we've used this as a negotiating tool to get significant additional enhancements to the existing footpaths and rights of way, which we probably wouldn't have got if everything had been within the 400 metres. So I think the view is on balance a benefit, because some of the existing residents who may not be within 400 metres of bus stops have got a far greater chance or far greater likelihood of using the bus stops now, with much better surfaces, much better lighting and drop curbs. And also, and I think as the photograph showed, the topography of the site is relatively positive. It's relatively flat. Certainly if this was a steeper site, I think those greater distances might be something which would have weighed against. And finally, and I think probably picking up on Councillor Robson's point before in terms of further development and the position we are in, with the national housing figures. You know, this is potentially one of the sites that, if it wasn't for the housing figure, there might have been a request to reduce the numbers and get more within the 400 metres. But looking at the tilted balance position, a number of national planning appeal decisions, and whether we all agree with this, officers, members or whatever, and parish councils, you know, the national position from His Majesty's government is clear in terms of the perceived importance of boosting the housing numbers. And I've seen quite a few planning appeal decisions come through of late where some of the walking distances and some of the distances to bus stops are not ideal. But under the presumption in favour, unless that's seen as a significant and demonstrable adverse impact, and I do think we'd be struggling with the active travel improvements we've got here and the relative positive topography of the site, where the default position would probably be for this to be allowed on appeal, is my judgment, Chair. Sorry, just on the management company as well, apologies. And again, I fully understand the point that Councillor Wilkes makes on that, and I would imagine there may be other members in the room who've got new or newish housing sites in their divisions where residents have been concerned about A, how much they pay per quarter to get their grass cut, and B, in some cases, the quality of the public space management, because I've seen a number of cases where residents are paying quite pricely sums of money per quarter or per month to get the grass looked after, and some management companies are doing a very poor, at best, job, if not an appalling job. It's something that I've talked about with Jeff Knight, my equivalent in Clean and Green, and I've given a briefing to a number of members across the last few years. And the long and short of it is, I'm afraid we cannot insist on that as planning authority. It's a civil matter, and if residents are buying a new house, part of the conveyancing will make clear how much they have to pay a month, and if there is going to a private management company. What we do now, and what we'll have here, is one of our standard planning conditions that will say if it is Persimmon's intention to put this site to a private management company for future maintenance, that they will have to submit to us a maintenance regime to show how they're looking to maintain it, and we will use that ability to make sure that the site is looked after. But we just cannot get into the debate whether the land should be handed over to us at nil cost to future residents, or whether Persimmons would wish to exercise their right to maintain the land and then transfer it to their own private management company. But perhaps, Chair, that's something you might want to invite Oliver's comments on in terms of what their future intentions are.
Ollie, would you like to contribute there?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Councillor Wilkes, I think there was a couple of points you raised. The first one was around affordable rent and any of them being bungalows. It is something that we look at. It's not proposed on this scheme, but we do always take a variety of units to the market for registered providers. There isn't on this one, but it is something that we look at on all schemes, just based on the need and the requirements of the individual RPs at the time we take them to the market. And then in terms of the management company point, we generally request that the council provide us with confirmation whether they do want to take on the long-term stewardship of the site. So I'm surprised that we haven't had this conversation on this site yet, but it's something that we're more than happy to look at. We do generally go down the resident management company route, which isn't as straightforward as a private management company. It does give the residents more control over the management and the stewardship of the site longer term. But transferring that land to the council isn't something that we would discount. It's something that we will be open to looking at on any scheme moving forward. So more than happy to have a discussion on that.
Thank you very much. Any more questions from the members? Do you want to open debate now? Councillor Wilkes.
I mean, notwithstanding the issue as I've got with the bus stops, which I don't agree with these developments being built so far from bus stops, and I'm pretty sure it is 800 metres still. It's not a sufficient reason to say no to this application. and it looks as though most of the things I would normally be complaining about, things like tandem parking and all of these other things, they've actually dealt with in a reasonable manner. I would ask that we do make sure that that conversation is had regarding the potential for us to take over the site on a commuted sum, but I'd move approval simply because it's, you know, on the balance of everything, it's a reasonable application, and we're tied on all of this, of course, with the number of houses that we have to pass in the county from the government legislation.
Thank you. Any more comments? Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's a shame to lose the farmland, and yeah, I agree with Councillor Wilkes on the bus stop situation. But again, I think it's a pretty good project here. There's plenty of open green spaces. The way it's built into the valley and with the trees to the south, it's quite. It doesn't affect the landscape harm. It's very, very low. It's obviously well related to the settlement of Sackerson. It's a short walk into Sackerson from where it's at. And I think as well it has quite good access to the A167 and a good link to Durham and up to Chelsea Street and onto Newcastle on the A1 or anything like that as well. So I think it's a really good proposal, and yeah, I'd like to second Councillor Wilkes' motion.
So we have a proposal, motion to approve the application made by Councillor Wilkes, seconded by Councillor Stevenson. Are we ready to put that to the vote? All those who agree to the application being granted? Any refusal or refusal? Abstention? Thank you. One abstaining. Thank you. That's 6 approving, 1 abstaining. Application granted. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that concludes
Yeah.
today's business. Thank you.